Hi, I'm Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region. And are you ready to knit with chain? Introducing Mithrola. Mithrola is a precious necklace knit with 11 yards of stainless steel chain and Japanese glass seed beads. The fabric that is made when you knit with stainless steel chain is absolutely gorgeous, and I'm so excited for you to feel the drape on your needles. Inspired by the legendary mithril armor in Tolkien's Middle Earth, Mithrola is a blend of elvish magic and a side of my alter ego, Lola. This video is going to teach you all the tips and tricks that you need to know for knitting Mithrola. Give you some really good pointers about knitting with chain that I think will help you have great success. It's important for me to tell you before we dive in that you do need to have the pattern and a kit ready to go to follow along with this video. The first thing that we're going to do is talk about all the materials that you need to knit Mithrola. So let's dive in with that first. Okay, grab your Mithrola kit. We're going to talk about everything that you need to know to have success knitting Mithrola. Here's everything that's in your kit, plus the extras that you're going to have to look for in your toolbox. The first most exciting thing is the spool of 1.1 millimeter stainless steel chain. The next thing that's in your kit is 25 size 6 Japanese seed beads. If you're a Lola's Choice member, you got 2 different colors of beads to choose from. So you'll get to choose if you want to use the pearl color or the dark gray color. That's up to you. The other things in your kit are for when you get to working on the clasp at the very end of the kit. And you have 2 sterling silver crimp beads, you have 2 crimp bead covers, you have 2 oval jump rings, and then you have an S-hook clasp set. Those are all the findings you'll need for finishing. Other things that you need to grab from your house are some pliers and some wire cutters. I don't think that you need to go out and buy any special jewelry pliers or wire cutters. You'll probably find that in your toolbox, you have tools that will work beautifully for this. And finally, you're going to need some knitting needles. And you'll see underneath the camera here that I have a few different styles of knitting needles. What's most important for your knitting needle is that you choose a knitting needle that has a sharp tip on it. So it doesn't really matter the material of your knitting needle as long as there's a sharp tip. I knit Mithrolas. I've knit like 10 or 11 of them now, and I've knit them on all different needles just to make sure there was no damage happening to needles. I think some of you might enjoy knitting on bamboo or wood for this. Some of you might enjoy knitting on metal. That sharp tip is what is important. So once you have gathered all of your supplies, you're going to get ready to start knitting Mithrola. The one thing that I want to do before we start knitting together is just show you the construction of this necklace because it's really interesting and it's easier to see if I show it to you on a neck. So let's do that. Let's talk about the construction of Mithrola. I think it'll really help you understand what's happening on your needles if you see how the necklace is built. So you can see right here a finished Mithrola on a neck, and you're casting on with I-cord right here at one end. And you're knitting I-cord for just a few rows, and then you start increasing until you get to the middle point of the necklace. Then you'll start decreasing down the other side and work I-cord until Mithrola is the length that you want. So you'll see, because you're casting on the same number of rows for I-cord, no matter how long you're making your Mithrola, you'll see that the clasps happening on the end happen asymmetrical to the center of the back of the neck. And I think that's important to point out. It's part of why it drapes so beautifully and organically around the neck is that asymmetry to the design. So it's quite important. I think also you'll get to see the clasp right here on the back of the neck. We'll go over that in detail towards the end of this video. And as you get into knitting Mithrola, know that we've time stamped everything below in the video so you can jump around to different points as you're at that part in the pattern. So now that you understand the construction, the next thing that we get to do is get ready to knit. Okay, the only thing that you need to do before you get to start knitting is we need to get some beads onto our chain. So I've got a spool of the chain right here, and when the chain comes, you'll see that it has some plastic on the outside edge. And all you need to do is kind of run your finger over the outside to find the end of the plastic tape that is covering the chain. That tape is there because if it wasn't there, the chain would just start spooling off of your spool. So all you're going to do is unwind that. If you cannot find the end of the plastic, which happened to me sometimes, just grab your knitting needle and pull up on the plastic. You can easily break it and get that plastic off of there. Once you have the plastic off of there, you'll see that the end of your chain will be there and ready to go. So you want to get your beads onto your chain. You need to get 21 beads onto your chain. And I found it easiest to just take my chain and drop it into the hole of a bead. And you're going to continue doing that until you have 21 beads on there. If you're having a hard time seeing this, the trick here is to hold your chain so you have like maybe a ½ inch or a little bit less of the chain falling down. Make sure that you're sitting somewhere with really good light. I suggest working on Mithrola at a table, somewhere quiet and easy that you can put your knitting down whenever you're not working on it. I don't think knitting with chain is couch knitting. And if you try to do that, you might find very quickly that you'll want to move to a table. So get 21 beads strung onto your chain, and then you are ready to start knitting. So let's do that next. Okay, it is time for us to start knitting. Knitting with chain is not hard, but the metal is very slippery. So if you drop a stitch, you're going to find that your knitting is just going to unravel. So it will really help you to be at a table when you're working on Mithrola. If you need to put your work down partway through, finish a row and then put some end stoppers onto your needle so those stitches don't go anywhere. It really helps to like have a place that you work on this project instead of like bouncing around from couch to armchair to wherever. The other thing about knitting Mithrola is if you make a mistake, you can try to unknit and go back through a few stitches, but you won't be able to like rip out your knitting because you're not going to be able to get those stitches back onto your needle. Trust me, I know this, and it was a total buzzkill when I tried to do that, so don't do that. The stitches I use are really easy though, and I think that you're going to have success doing this. Mithrola starts out with a 3-stitch cast on. If you have knit some of my shawls that start with a 3-stitch cast on, this cast on is going to be very familiar to you. It's a version of a long tail cast on, and you end up with 3 stitches on your needles. So what you're going to want to do is put your needle in your right hand and give yourself about a 3-inch tail. That's just so that you can get the clasp and the beads on the end when you're done knitting your necklace. And you'll see I've got the chain going over the right hand needle, and it's just long enough that I don't let go of it. And then I'm going to set up by taking my needle and coming around and grabbing the chain on the index finger, and then going back into the loop on the thumb again and coming around and grabbing that chain again. And I'll end up with 3 stitches right there. If that's a little tricksy for you, you might want to try with yarn first and then jump into using it with the chain. So now you can see I've got 3 stitches on my needle and I'm ready to go, starting to work the I-cord. And I'm going to grab my second needle here and I'm going to go into that first stitch on the needle. But what you're going to quickly notice when you're knitting with chain is chain has no like flexibility to it, no like elasticity. It's not stretching for you at all. So you might find that you need to work down towards the tip a little bit to easily get your needle in. And you'll see that my thumb is kind of holding these other stitches to keep them from sliding as well. And then I'm knitting one stitch, and then I'm knitting the second stitch, and then I am knitting the third stitch. And now I have 3 stitches knit, and you can just kind of pull down on that tail right there. And now what I'm going to do is take all 3 of those stitches and slide them to the other end of my needle. And I'm going to go ahead and work that row twice more. So I'm going to knit 1, I'm going to knit 2, and I'm going to knit 3. This is so much fun. I love knitting with it. And now one more time, sliding to the other end and knitting 3. One of you is going to ask me if I've tried to use an I-cord tool with chain yet, and the answer is no. No, I have not tried to use an I-cord tool with it yet. There's my 3 stitches, and I'm going to slide to the other end one more time. Now I'm going to start into knitting the increase section. So this first row is a knit 1, and then it's a yarn over, and then I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm going to yarn over, and then I am going to knit 1. And I have 5 stitches on my needle. Now I'm going to turn my work so that I have the wrong side facing, and I'm going to slip one purlwise with chain in front. That was a hard one for me. I kept writing yarn and it's chain. And now I'm going to purl 4 to the end of the row. You'll see the reason everyone's using US size 6 or 4 millimeter needles on this project is that your chain just becomes the size of your needle. So your gauge will be the same for everybody because the chain just falls around the circumference of your needle. Now we get into the beading. So what I'm going to do is come down my yarn and slide up a few beads so they're a little bit closer right there. And I'm going to bring that bead all the way up so it's touching the first stitch on the left-hand needle. And then I'm going to make a yarn over on the right-hand needle right there. And I'm making that yarn over on the right-hand needle. And then the next stitch is a knit 1 together through the back loop. When you make that yarn over, make sure that you've got the right leg to the front and the left leg to the back. There should be no twist right there. So after I make that yarn over, I'm going to come into that second stitch through the back loop. There you go. And then I'm reading my pattern to make sure that I get this right. I have made a yarn over, I've knit 1 through the back loop. I'm going to make another yarn over. I'm going to knit 1 through the back loop. And then I'm going to knit 2 together. And when you go to knit 2 together, that might feel hard. So go ahead and just move yourself down to the tip a little bit so that you can get your knitting needle in there. Remember, sharp tips really help. Knit 2 together and then knit that last stitch. And now you've knit your first row with a bead right there. And you're going to turn your work. You're going to slip 1 purlwise with chain in front. You're going to get very comfortable doing that. And now you are going to purl to the last stitch. When you get to that last stitch is a yarn over, and you want to make sure that the bead is all the way to the back of the needle. And let's make sure you see that. Do you see this bead right here on the needle? Make sure it's falling all the way to the back right there when you go to work into it. And you want to knit into that stitch through the back so that you're tightening it up a little bit. And you can see that bead is sitting right there on the yarn over. If you knit that stitch without knitting it through the back loop, the loop with the bead on it ends up kind of stretching out over time. So it's really important that you knit that stitch through the back loop. Now you're going to continue on, and you're going to continue working these 2 rows until you have 15 stitches on your needle. You'll end up having 10 beads coming up the side. And I just want to show you this one more time because I really want you to see that yarn over, and that I don't have a twist is when I'm making that yarn over, and then I'm working that stitch through the back loop, and then I'm making a yarn over. I'm knitting that stitch through the back loop, and now I'm going to knit to 3 stitches before the end of the row right here, and I'm going to knit 2 together. Remember, for that knit 2 together, which can be a little bit tricksy, sometimes you just have to come down your needle a little bit so that you can get your needle in there. Just right down on that tip, but be careful. And then knit 1. And then you're going to turn your work and work the wrong side row as you've done it before. So you'll be continuing on till you have 15 stitches, 10 beads along that side, and then it is time to do the decreased rows. So let's look at that next. Okay, we're having a moment because I'm ready to do the decrease section, and you can see underneath the camera here how beautiful just that increase section looks. When I picked this up, it kind of looked like that, which might be stressful for you. You'll see I've got it in the middle of my needles. I'm not towards the end right now. And the drape is so, let's get that little end out of there so you can just see how pretty and sparkly and drapey, and like I can spread the stitches out so you can really see the knit stitches. You can really appreciate the stockinette stitch there. This, I just love to play with it so much, and I'm so excited to hear what you all think. What were we doing? We were getting ready to do the decrease section. So let's do that together. I'm looking at the pattern here, and I'm ready to start with row 23 in the decrease section. And the decrease section, all that's happening is we're decreasing back down to 3 stitches. And you'll see that the stitches look a little bit different for this section, but the technique is the same. I just want to show you with rows 23 and 24 what is happening. So the first thing that you're going to do is make that yarn over. Again, make sure that you don't have a twist and you're just going over the needle with that bead all the way touching the left hand needle. And now the next thing that I'm going to do is knit 2 together through the back loop. So I'm going into the back loop of both of the stitches on the left hand needle, and I'm working those 2 stitches together and sliding them off the needle. And now I'm going to make a yarn over, and I'm going to knit through 2 together through the back loop again, and then I am going to knit to the last 3 stitches and then knit 2 together, knit 1. And now I'm at my last 3 stitches, and I'm going to knit 2 together, just like that, and I'm going to knit 1. What I want to pretend right now, because row 24 is the same as row 4, you already know how to do that. We went over that. I want to go over, like, let's say I forgot to do something, or I'm not happy with the way a stitch looks and I need to go back a few stitches. The trick there is to unknit, not to like take all of these stitches off of your needle because they will just completely unravel. And when I unknit, I'm going to leave my right side facing, and I'm going to go into the first stitch on my, so not actually the first stitch on my right hand needle, but the stitch below that stitch. And then I'm going to undo the chain. And then I'm going to take my needle tip and I'm going into both stitches because that's the knit 2 together. And I'm going to undo the chain. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch and undo the chain. The trick here is to go slow, and you can see that It's pretty easy to unknit, but this is the way you would fix something. Let's say you forgot a yarn over or you forgot to do a decrease and you don't want to undo all of your knitting. This would be how you would get back to that point to fix something if you're not happy with it. It's just like this. The other thing that I want to look at before we get to the very end of the I-cord and how to do the clasp is what happens if you are just not happy with something and you want to start again. So what you're going to do, don't freak out. We're just gonna, I was saying that to Max, who's behind the camera. He's freaking out right now. I just took my needles out of my chain. And you can see I'm working at a table. You really want to do this at a table. Now I'm going to take my spool of chain and I'm going to start to wind up. And as I wind up, I'm winding up with my beads on my chain and I'm going slow. And the really big trick here is to not pull tightly if you think you've run into a knot, but just to go really kind of loose and gentle. If you run into something that seems like it snags, like just happened to me right there, don't pull tightly on it. Just kind of massage with your fingers the way you saw me do. And what will happen is the chain is so slippery, it will just let itself go and relax. But do this slowly. Don't do this quickly. You'll see I'm getting those beads onto the spool as I go so they don't get all caught up in something. And it's actually like a little bit fun to do, but I wanted you to see how easy it is to do if you do need to do it. It's not that big a deal. Sometimes necklaces will get kind of stuck into like a really big knot if you've ever had a fine chain necklace. I find this chain is really easy to get undone. Just kind of, this might sound inappropriate, but just finger it a little bit if you need to, if you run into something that feels like a knot, and that will come right undone for you. You can see how I did that right there. Just go slow. It's not a big deal. You can do it. That was an important step for me to show you before we get into the finishing of Mithrola. So let's do that next. Okay, it is time to finish Mithrola together. You can see down here under the camera that I have knit my I-cord chain as long as I want it. You want to knit this chain so that your Mithrola is an inch shorter than the finished length, because the finishing clasps and beads end up adding about an inch at the back of the neck, like I showed you in that construction section. I knit all of my Mithrolas with this section, this I-cord section, about 4.5 inches long. So I'm at the very end here. I'm at 4.5 stitches. And what I'm going to do is slip one knitwise with the chain in back and then knit two together. And then I'm going to pass that slip stitch over. And that is going to finish off the I-cord right there. So after I have done all of that, I am going to cut my chain, giving myself about 3 inches right there. So I'm just going to put that down so I can grab my wire cutters right here. I'm going to give myself a tail about 3 inches, and then I'm going to go ahead and trim that and set the chain aside. And now what I'm going to do is just pull the tail through, and that will finish off the end of the I-cord beautifully. You would finish I-cord with yarn just the same way. Okay, let's grab everything that we need for finishing the end. So I've got my crimp beads. I've got 4 more beads. 2 beads are going to go on each side of that clasp end. I've got my crimp bead covers and the jump rings and everything. So the first thing that you want to do is string on 2 beads onto the end of the chain right here. So I'm just putting 2 beads on. That gives a fun little dangle. I tried it without them, and it's just a nice little finishing touch to have them back there. And then the next step is to string on a crimp bead. And I think that this might be the most challenging part of Mithrola, because when you string on the crimp bead, you're dropping your chain into the hole on the crimp bead, and that hole is big enough for the chain, but it'll take a second to line everything up and get the chain in there. Okay, once you have that crimp bead on there, you want to slide it up, and you'll slide it up and don't have it like exactly all the way tight up against that beads. Just have it out a little bit. So there's a tiny bit of room right there for the beads. And that's because you need room for the crimp bead cover to fit over the crimp bead. And once you've got that crimp bead up there, you'll go ahead and grab your pliers, and you don't need to use a crimp bead tool for this. If you have one, you can certainly use it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and crush that crimp bead. This crimp bead is sterling silver, so it crushes really easily. And you can see I've just got a little bit of room right there. And now you're going to grab a crimp bead cover and place that over the crimp bead. And you want to have the crimp bead sitting kind of horizontally inside of there so it fits inside nice and neatly. And then you'll go ahead and crush the crimp bead cover around the crimp bead, just like that. There will be a tiny little bit of an opening when you go to close that, but it'll get pretty tight and nice. Once you have the crimp bead covered and you like the way it looks, then you'll go ahead and grab your wire cutters and just cut the end off right at the end right there. And then you've got one end done. You're going to do the exact same thing to the second side, to the other end of your I-cord. And then you're going to finish things off by grabbing one of your oval jump rings. And I'm going to grab two pliers here. I find it a little easier when you work with jump rings to open them up with two pliers like that. And then you'll go ahead and go into the I-cord a little bit. Don't go right at the very end right there, but you want to kind of bury your jump ring into your I-cord, and then take one end of your clasp, of the S clasp, put that on to the jump ring, and then close that jump ring back up, just like that. That's one end of the clasp right there. You'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side of your Mithrola, and then you will be done. Do you want to hear a cool thing about stainless steel chain? You don't need to block it. It is ready to wear the moment you get all of those clasps on. I am so excited to hear what you all think of this project. She's precious. She's beautiful. She's a showstopper. People are gonna be asking you about your necklace when you wear your Mithrola. I will have kits in the shop at some point. I'll do my best to keep them in stock. If you are wondering when more kits come, make sure you're subscribed to my newsletter. Make sure you hit subscribe on my YouTube channel. I'll be sharing tips and tricks. I've got some other ideas for jewelry that are percolating up here. But first, let's all have success knitting Mithrola. Thank you so much for following along with me, and happy knitting with chain.